Greetings, Questers. Let's start on part 2 of the game type editor. So before we talked about pretty much the basic setup of the entire game type editor and how that works, so I won't really go into a lot of those details anymore. I might go and add some details during this video that might help certain pieces, but we'll mostly focus on just trying to create the NPC character sheet. So what I'm going to do is you'll see me, I'll go back and forth between the game type editor and the actual game itself that I have, because then I can just use this to show examples of what I'm trying to do. So I'll go ahead and close this. I'm not going to save any of my changes. And when Questline loads back up, the game itself, I'll have this, and this is going to be our example that we're going to use. So this slag toad, I really try to look at this and break it down into its major pieces, right? So you have the name of the creature, you have some sort of descriptive information that talks about the creature itself, you know, the monster level, it's a medium beast and an elemental, and then it has its attributes with some of its saves that are built here, its number of hit points and armor rating, the speed, its immunities and things like this, traits. And these are all different pieces of the character sheet that we're going to try to emulate inside of Questline. Things like features and actions and reactions, these further expand upon what it can actually do. So when I come back and forth with this, it will be a little simpler to use this. Normally I have some sort of PDF open or something like that that I can refer to, and I can look at this and I don't have to go back and forth so often. But I'm doing this for a visual so that all of you can follow along with what I'm trying to do. So the basic parts that I'm going to start with is, okay, I want to make sure I get it set up so that the name and the basic level and the type is available for me, as well as maybe get the basic attributes going, the hit points, the armor rating, and the speed. So we'll kind of start with that. So let's start with, let's just go to the name. So we'll go into the editor and I'll click on the NPC sheet. So if you need to delete a component, this little button right here is a simple delete component. I'm going to delete both of these just so I can start from scratch. And moving forward, what we'll do is starting from scratch, giving us the ability to just kind of pick items and go along. So pretty much any sheet that you wish to have on in Questline that you intend to actually make a token out of, I would say that you almost always want a basic bio. And a basic bio is a simple way of just saying, this is the character's name, this is, any sort of basic rough info that people see at a glance that is very easy to see. Typically, you just leave it with the root field name of bio. You really only ever have one of these on your character sheet at a time, so I just always leave this. You can change the root fields at any time you wish, but I don't really recommend it with the bio. It doesn't really need to do anything. Now, there's a primary field here, which is the name itself, and then there's a subname. And I've actually given you options so you can change this so that you can say you want to give it some further details to make it specific for your game. So in this case, we had whether the character was a beast or if it was elemental, or the descriptor of what it is, and I can oftentimes modify this so that the default value is something more descriptive to them. So if I were to just say type, it will show up there, and then when they go into the edit button, they can actually edit the type and it will show them that name, and it's a little easier for them to find. And what we'll also do is we'll talk about adding custom fields. So a new field here, I'm going to change the field name. You want to make sure that all your field names are always something unique across the entire character sheet. Otherwise, you can run into problems where data might overwrite other data points. In components, if you have the same component, same root field name for the component, and the same custom fields, it will overwrite them. You won't really run into this very often, because if you change the root field name of your component to be descriptive, it will actually be different and you won't run into this issue. So in this case, we had one which is level. Also, the field name needs to be at least 3 characters long. And then we'll put level there, and then category, and we'll just put details. And then the visibility type, you have 2 different types. You have what's called a panel or a detail. And a panel will show up here, right underneath, and it will create like a mini panel of various items. If I were to create multiple items, you know, I could say type. I'm not going to go change that, and I can do panel again. You'll see how they kind of like step out from each other. But in this case, oftentimes with characters, I have like, you know, height, weight, you know, gender, that kind of stuff. I can put this in here, and I can actually use what's called a detail, and it'll show up down at the bottom. Now, specifically, I'll save this real quick and go back to my little reference. And what we're really talking about is the size, the type, and any sort of extra. So in here it says size and its creature type. So it's an elemental beast. So let's go back and replicate that. So what we can do is we can actually change this to say size and type, right? So that makes it a little easier. And we added level, so that's pretty simple and straightforward. And if I go back to look at the reference again, this is where you kind of go back and forth a lot. It gets a little difficult sometimes. So things like immunities or vulnerabilities, that's a good place to put up there as well, which is down here. So we go back in here, and then we can actually just change this. So immunity. And then we can say details, and maybe we'll just experience for that. And then the group or the category, I mean, shows up when you're in the editor itself. When the player clicks the edit button, it'll actually group them by this category field. So it's a good way to kind of group items if you really want to. Or, abilities. And then we'll say details, and then we'll also make it a detail. And so now this will show up, and these will be hidden unless you put something in them, so you don't have to worry about it like taking up space. And that's pretty much the simple, okay, we're good, for what I think we're going to need for this monster. Now, there's an option here called token override. Now, this is one of the most important options that you can have for character sheets, as if you choose this option, which I'll do it for this, the tokens themselves will actually override this value if you change the value inside the token when you're on a battle map. So let's say you lay down 5 goblins. I can name them Goblin 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it will not actually change the root field of the character sheet itself. So let me talk about that just a tiny bit. When you look at your characters, you have your character list here, right? And we'll go into my character Elfric. This is a player character sheet, and it has all my details. His name is Elfric, and it will stay that way no matter what I do. And that's because under the player sheet, I don't have that option toggled. With a monster, if I were to actually create a brand new monster here, which, you know, Goblin, and I pick the NPC sheet, quickly save that. The NPC sheet here just has a very basic setup. And if I change Goblin here, this is a global change for all goblins that characters derive from this. If I were to take this Goblin, though, and drag it to the battle map, and I were to actually open this in this editor, I can actually change this to say Goblin 1. And the reason why when this saves, it doesn't actually affect this version of the sheet, because that's how the token override system works, is that every component has the ability to override the specific data that gets saved per token. So this is a really good way for you to be able to say, these are NPCs, I'm going to have 10 of these on the board, and I'm going to want to be able to manipulate those values per token rather than per character itself. So let's go back. Let's talk about the next piece. So in here, we're actually going to go and add in, let's start with the hit points and the armor rating and the speed, because those will be easy to kind of add quickly. So there is a hit point system, or I should say this really should be renamed to saying something like pool, but it's really kind of hard to understand. You can also view previews of these, but if I do hit points, what I can do is very quickly, I can manipulate this so that it can be more specific for the game that I want. And in this case, we have a basic hit point system. We don't need to go into the too much into this. There is another one called threshold, where it's essentially the inverse of hit points, where my goal for basic calculation is going to 0. But with a threshold, it actually is trying to go above a value. Things like games like Genesis and stuff like that. So in this case, what we're going to do, hit points stays the same. Don't need to change the title. Root field name is hit points. I don't need to change that. My view type, I'm going to change it from inline. Inline is this where I have a value on the left, which is my current, to a value on my right, which is my maximum. I'm actually going to change it to current. And so with current, what I'll do is I'll actually set my icon type. You can choose from hearts or box. Hearts is fine for hit points. Death saves. Death saves are for things like D&D 5th edition, where you actually have saves that are relative to trackers that are, how many times have I rolled my death saves? Have I succeeded or failed? There's other versions, there's things like the wound table, where I can roll a random die to get a value from a table. And then there's a count tracker, which is things for like Shadowrun, where depending on the number of wounds you've taken, you can actually get negatives applied to your total rolls and stuff like that. So that kind of covers a lot of these different bases. To move an item, you can actually use this row and column, and I can actually just quickly move these over. So I typically try to keep the hit points to the right and to the top, because most people, that's one of the most common things people use. The is primary field, this is set up so that this is marked as the primary tracker inside of Questline, or I should say primary pool. And this is useful for when you're displaying your token, whether or not the hit point bar shows up on the character itself. Allow temp, yes, this game allows temporary hit points. Allow negative, does the game actually allow you to go into the negative? Can go back over here. Yes, I do believe that it does. And then show max it lets me edit the maximum number of hit points right here. And then you can change the title of the max to do what you want. Include group count is specifically for games like Genesis, where you actually group monsters. So you can have like 5 tokens on the board, and all of them actually are part of a group, and their total health is actually kind of like displayed as a group itself. And then finally, show dead icon. And show dead icon is the primary way. If I click this button, it will actually throw up the death icon on that token, so it's easy to track that. So if the character's actually dead or the monster's dead, I just click this button and it will actually display it on the token itself. We'll save this. Like I said, save often. You don't want to lose any of your stuff. And then you can actually change the tooltips over the buttons to say something more specific, like apply damage, or if it was like, you're tracking your mana or something like that, you can adjust these values. And I'm actually I don't need any death saves. And so there. All right, so now I have some hit points. Now, one of the other items was speed and your armor rating, right? So let's talk about your armor rating, which we're going to get into the basic attributes, and I'm going to do a simple version of the attributes. So with the attributes, I apologize, sometimes I have to pause and start, so you might see me, like, there might be interruptions from point to point. So the attributes is kind of a basic container for any sort of value you want to store for a character. It can be as simple as a single item, like, you know, in this case, armor rating. But it can also be as complex as the entire attributes, you know, strength, dex, all that kind of stuff. And so you'll want to actually use various types of this to actually get you what you want. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy from the player sheet the other main attributes, because this is a good way to show how to set this up. Is I can come in, I can go right to here, and you know, they have metaphysical, you know, luck and coordination and that kind of stuff. And I believe that if I save this and leave, that we really only have strength, dex, endurance, awareness, intellect, and charisma. And we don't actually have some of the other attributes that exist. And you might actually want that for some monsters or something like that. So you could create an entirely different sheet for that kind of thing if that was what your goal was. But we're going to try to keep it simple, like I said. But what we can do is we can come into the player and we're going to copy the component. I'll change to the NPC sheet and I'm just going to hit paste. And so now it's a very easy way for me to copy the values. And I'll actually just delete the metaphysical attribute section. And there we go. And it's pretty straightforward for me to be able to copy and change these values. Specifically for the NPC. Now, what I have set up here is this attribute is set up as called this row panel. There's a lot of different options here, and panels versus pips versus rows versus row panel have a different view and how this works. By the way, a lot of these tooltips try to explain all of this stuff. Feel free to mouse over them and read them, you know, whenever you like. And then there's what's called a role type, and how, you know, an actual role is affected by whatever you're trying to set up here. And there's a lot of different options here, and I keep expanding this so that it improves the usability of these attributes. I would say the two biggest components in the system are probably the basic skills and the basic attributes, and maybe the hit points, I guess. So there's probably three. And they really are kind of the fundamental of how everything kind of interacts with you know, being able to roll stuff and how you get rolls to work. And so we can get into a lot of details with each one. I'm not going to go over it right now. I can explain better in maybe other videos and talk about specific examples and how each one of them work. But it's a lot. Now, in this case, what we're using a row panel, which shows everything in rows, but it has a panel for the main value on the left here. You can change the value to the left, to the right, how you know, it's kind of up to you how you want to set that. And there's a lot of other options too. Now in this case, we have a max value of 20, a min value of -3, and the default is 0. And there's a bunch of other options too. Things like, can I customize this? Can I allow a bonus on this? Do I want to ignore the bonus as part of the roll? You know, there's a lot of different pieces here. Now, in this case, I think we're good with this. We can go down into the attributes themselves. So you have attributes, which is a container. So in this case, we have physical and mental. So I created two attribute blocks. There's the physical block, and then there's the mental block. And you can even like put a descriptive text in here so that when the player mouses over these individual items, it will give them details so that, you know, maybe they want to read some information, useful tooltips. That's a great way of doing it. So I've named the attribute, like in this case, physical, and in this case, now we have strength and that kind of stuff. And because I chose what's called base roll with bonus value, what I do is I actually have this so that the value that's in here is actually going to be a bonus to this base roll. So in this case, it's going to be a 1d20 plus whatever the value is in this. So if I wanted to roll a strength check, I would click this button and it's going to do a 1d20 plus 1 if this was a 1. And so I can set this up and go into a lot of detail for, you know, specific games and what have you. And so each one is pretty much a copy of the other. You know, they're all relatively similar. They work in the same fashion, and it gives me the ability to, you know, add and remove as I see fit for, you know, even if I decided to customize this, so because I want to do it in some other way. Now, the next, what we were going on through, so we've added that. So we have the basic attributes. We were talking about hit points. We've added speed, and those attributes. We were talking about wanting to add an armor rating and a speed. And we'll have to get into the saves as well, because that's going to be more specific. So you'll see here I have my defenses, and my defenses actually are another attribute. And you can always see the very top item up here tells you what kind of attribute it is. What kind of component it is. So in this case, this is another attribute component, and this one actually has is set up to actually use derived values. And so what's really useful is I can actually copy this, but you can see that things like I have this section called defenses, and then I have armor rating in here, and armor rating is actually set up so that, you know, the base value is always there, but I've also included this one to use an option called allow bonus. And so here you'll see this +0 on the right, and this actually gives me the opportunity to modify this on the fly as a player very easily, or as a GM. You know, I can modify these values pretty easily. And in this case, I have a new modifiers section, which is coming out in the next patch. This new modifiers system actually allows me to really adjust and build derived values. So you can get into much more complex things, like the reflexes is actually a bonus of adding your reflexes bonus, which is right here on the right here, and then adding your dexterity as well. So this is a more complicated setup where these total values will actually start to automatically change based on those other setups. Now in this case, we really just want to copy this as well. So we're going to copy that component, go to the NPC sheet, paste it, and now we have defenses in here. We have armor rating, which includes my reflexes, fortitude, anticipation, logic, and willpower. I can very quickly save that, and we can see that the slag toad over here actually has all of those just as easily. And you'll see that if I set this up, because his charisma is a -2, you'll see that it automatically updates my value there, and it's much simpler to modify these values and gets us going. And this is by setting up multiple different attribute components. So now we have armor rating, we have all our defenses set up, and let's go into adding some speed. Let's go take a look at where we put it as the player. So the speed is over here that went underneath our main attributes. And in this one, I'm using a D20 speed component. There was a specific set when I first started Questline. I built this around, I started by building the D20 stuff. And as time went on, I started realizing that I could actually expand these components to not be so specific to specific games. So you'll see these, you know, D20 initiative stuff. I have some World of Darkness and White Wolf stuff, and then Blades in the Dark. And a lot of this stuff can actually be covered in all of the basic ones now. Pretty much from the top to bottom, you can do everything that you want with the basic components, and you don't need to do these specific ones. And I plan on actually changing the speed component into a generic speed component where you'll be able to customize all these different values to say, you know, you want, you know, maybe you even have like a tremor, or sorry, like a burrowing speed. And, you know, you could add that on the fly, much similarly to the way I do with other, like with the bio and adding custom fields. I'll end up improving this over time. But in this case, we're just going to copy the speed one. And, you know, actually, I don't even need to do that. I won't copy it this time. I'm actually just going to add it. And we're just going to say D20 speed. And I'm actually going to make it one more. I'm going to add one width. I'm going to add the row so that it moves down. And then that's pretty much it. I don't need to do much else. Now the NPC can have multiple different movement speeds, and it's pretty easy for me to manipulate that. We'll save that. Go back to this main page. We'll open up this goblin. Now we have movement speed, and I can actually even say maybe they even have a climbing speed, and I can add 20 feet of climbing speed. One thing to do, and I didn't do it in this one, is that oftentimes there's defaults for games, and often I found that in MythCraft 20 feet is more the common value than 30. So we had armor rating, now we have a speed, and let's go ahead and close this. We saved it, and then we're going to take a look at some of these other things. So they have skills and they have traits, and they are, let's see, so we added immunities and vulnerabilities, and then we can actually say we need to add, I don't think we need other specific values. I think what we can do is we can actually just go into the skills, which is going to be another copy. The traits, immutable, vigilant, regen 5. Oh, I guess we can add traits to the bio. That's a good thing to add. So let's do that. We'll add another field. Traits. Details. And we'll add it as a detail. And this is a pretty simple way to add traits to the character sheet so that it can be recorded later. Next is going to be skills. So let's talk about the skills. In MythCraft, there's all the basic skills, and what I've done for the skill system, this is one of the other big components that exists, is there's a lot of different options similarly to the way attributes work. Is there's a view type, skill and description is just a basic skill name and a description. Skill and ranks is something much more akin to, when you have like circles you fill in for specific skills, and those ranks actually affect the role in some way. Skill and value, which is much more, I should say skill and value is calculated sub-values, things like Call of Cthulhu, where they have actually derived like multiple different multiplicative effects based on your base skill value. And then there's just skill and value, and then skill and base roll. And base roll is much more akin to games like Savage Worlds that have like dice that you actually roll. So skill and value is what this is, where it's just a basic value here, and that you can edit this value, and this value can also be derived from a specific attribute. And this value, or sorry, under this skill here, under alchemy, I can say I have an intellect, and you can see all these derived values. You can even derive values from other skills too. But in this case, it's based off of intellect, so I get a bonus from my intellect. There is the group, so you'll see that when I go into the skill system or on the character sheet and I go to add a skill, it will be grouped by these various groups that we have. And then the type, this add type is something I've added pretty new recently, and what it does is this actually lets me say it's a prefab or an immediate. An immediate is, this is a default value that every character gets no matter what. So if I create a brand new character, it'll automatically throw in all of these immediates right onto the skill sheet for me, rather than letting the player pick. And it's a useful tool for things like everybody has athletics, and you can just simply make sure that everybody uses includes athletics as part of their basic skills. So again, we're just going to copy this because all of these skills are actually going to get copied because I can customize these skills per sheet. And you can get into a lot of detail with that too.